Hi everyone, thanks for coming back last night. I'm sure we're getting a few more bodies finding their way in again. I want to introduce Lliz Pavey. Thank you very much for joining us. And we will be cutting there. We'll give you a 5-minute warning at a time, but otherwise I'll step off and let you take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Lliz Pavey. I'm a dance artist and lecturer based at Northumbria University in Newcastle. And I'm also a shiatsu practitioner. And while you're listening to this presentation, I'm just inviting you to notice the conversation that's going on between your body and the seat or whatever surface is supporting you. So just maybe taking a moment to think into that conversation of touch between your body and the seat, the chair. Okay. So in this presentation, I would like to share how I'm reflecting on past dance experience in order to foster plans for a new project. I'm going to speak about 2 pre-pandemic projects that I led. Take Your Seats, which centered on attentive contact with chairs, and Green Grass, which was about encounters with artificial grass. This practice gave attention to our physical relationship with our immediate environment. Questions arose concerning risk and health, and about human behavior and doing and not doing. The new work I am planning will explore questions about how movement practice, particularly sighted practice, including encounters with living grass, can support well-being in this time of pandemic. My reflections and plans are informed by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought into sharp focus the significance to health and well-being of touch between humans and the wider environment. Here, perspectives on touch as potentially positive or harmful have rubbed up against each other. The pandemic has asked us to reevaluate practices of touch, of closeness and interaction with other people and with things. I know you will all recognize the importance of touch. Miranda Tufnell has said it underlines how we perceive and communicate with each other. It lays the foundations for our feelings of safety and belonging. Looking back on some of the thoughts I wrote in April 2020, shortly before the first lockdown, brought back to me the level of anxiety about touch and health that I was experiencing then. Although in many ways this feels like a distant memory, I also feel I may carry some residue of this fear. The quotation on the slide from Anne Cooper Albright's book, How to Land. I've used this book as a key source in preparing this presentation. Many of us grew up in a germophobic atmosphere in which our skin is seen as the container separating the clean self from the dirty outside. I won't read all the quotations in full. Albright promotes a letting the world in approach. Her philosophy and practice resonate strongly with my own, yet during this time of pandemic, I also felt the force of the public health messages about avoiding catching and spreading the virus. The impact of the pandemic is something that we will be working through for some time to come. A British Academy report has referred to our current time as a COVID decade, during which we will be dealing with the long-term, deep impacts of COVID in many areas of life, including on health and well-being, communities, and cohesion. So I'd just like to take a moment to explain about the images on the right-hand sides of the slides. The posters, please wear a face covering, were all around the buildings on the campus where I work. And then one day earlier this year, suddenly all these posters were gone, clearly forcibly removed from the walls and the doors on which they'd been stuck, taking with them paint, plaster, whatever. These trace marks seem to me both horrific and in many ways beautiful. So I went around taking literally dozens of photographs of these trace marks where the posters had been. And I would like to use these somehow in my new project. So the pandemic has offered opportunity for reflection and perhaps reevaluation of daily habits and life choices. Maybe experiences of isolation generate renewed desire to connect with others. There is a need to keep going, which offers opportunity to consider what Donna Haraway calls ongoingness. That is nurturing or inventing or discovering or somehow cobbling together ways of living and dying well with each other in the tissues of the earth, whose very habitability is threatened. This call to ongoingness and living humbly in relation to the earth can be a guiding principle for the new future practice I am moving into. But first, I will reflect back on past projects. So Take Your Seats was a succession of events and workshops I facilitated and group and solo improvised performances, a playful investigation into the relationship of sitting and of sitting affordances, notably chairs, to embodiment and well-being. As working with chairs is commonplace within dance and performance practice, this created opportunities for my own explorations to intersect with that of other artists. And the practice was often collaborative, most notably with dance artist Paula Turner and her Grand Gestures Dance Collective. Take Your Seats was initially motivated by reading the work of anthropologist Tim Ingold, where he draws attention to how footwear and chairs constrain human behavior, separating us from the ground and limiting our potential for thinking in movement. He writes, where the boot, in reducing the activity of walking to the activity of a stepping machine, deprives the wearer of the possibility of thinking with their feet, the chair enables sitters to think without involving the feet at all. Between them, the boot and the chair establish a technological foundation for the separation of thought from action and of mind from body. Movement practice in Take Your Seats sought to call attention to and counter our often sedentary lifestyles. It drew inspiration from Edward Tenner's assertion that, quotes, before the chair spread across the world, humanity had the greatest repository of postures of any species. While another key influence on our playful explorations was the work of Norwegian furniture designer Peter Opsvik, whose progressive ergonomics springs from a desire to encourage movement in sitting. David Abram has written about the effect of chairs on our lived experience and our movement potential, physical habits, and relationships to the earth. This sitting on chairs is a strange new thing for the primate body, civilized to be sure. Yet how much more nourishment our spines once knew from their oft renewed friendship with the ground, planting themselves there like trees as we prepared our food and whittled our implements, squatting on our haunches as we wove patterns into bright cloth and chatted with kin. Take Your Seats involved dance improvisations that were opportunities to explore something of the manifold possibilities of the human body in motion and repose, presenting playful acts of transformation, engaging with chairs in ways that freed them of their usual affordance, through oscillating between the everyday simple sitting and the extraordinary, playful, creative practice and expressive dance. The practice sought to foster awareness of and reflection on personal habits of embodiment and alternative physical possibilities. Performances challenged any assumption that playfulness is essentially for children, suggesting instead that play is in fact, as writer and broadcaster Michael Rosen has said, an intrinsic part of being human. One of the experiences that has stayed with me most powerfully is the 2 days I spent in Hexham Abbey, practicing sometimes with others and sometimes alone. This offered scope for indulgence in times of prolonged stillness and extended periods of movement. After all this exploration with chairs, I wanted to get down to the ground. In the summer of 2018, I ventured a new project entitled Green Grass, a rolling project, situated on the zigzag artificial grass slope, which was part of the new urban landscaping of the quad on the campus where I work. I framed the project as part of Northumbria University's Great Exhibition of the North Fringe. This was to be an ongoing movement practice throughout the weeks of the exhibition, leading to a culminating event. At its core, the project was about committing myself to a regular physical practice. It took me out of my office, away from my desk and chair, for a short time on days when I might otherwise have stayed sedentary. It was about building time into my work routine for honing skills of sensory awareness and attention, and reflecting on any effects I perceived this having on my wider life and well-being. I sought to share this practice with others, inviting individuals to join me sometimes and engaging in conversation with them about their experiences. Although looking back, I wish I had done more to document their contributions. My hope was that the practice might challenge personal habits and cultural norms and would foster reflection on the practical and philosophical implications of engaging with and experiencing the world from ground level. It was a chance to consider my assumptions about real and fake grass. Before commencing the practice, a risk assessment had to be approved. A man from the university's health and safety department coached me through the process of considering a host of possible dangers that could arise in the practice. I appreciate the importance of this. However, his understanding of how to minimize physical risk seemed to overlook the intelligence of the body to respond in the moment. I was strongly advised that I should train the participants in exactly how to roll, allowing them to before allowing them to commence participating. I was asked to state on the risk assessment that participants will be supplied with protective headgear if they wanted it. Without placing participants in danger, I wanted people to feel their way through the experience, to foster the skills of finding grounding through exploration. Anne Cooper Albright has written about disorientation, saying this practice of dwelling in the unforeseen requires a tolerance for ambiguity and conjures a state of being that is at once open to the world around us and grounded in our own sensory experience. Control measures required in the risk assessment seem to focus on actions taken in advance of practice, while not recognizing everybody's embodied knowledge at play while practicing, the knowledge of the moving, improvising body and its ability to think in movement quicker than conscious thought. As the weeks of the practice unfolded, I began to think that the most significant health and safety issue was dirt and mess, and the artificial grass's powerlessness to do anything about this. After rolling, my hands, arms, face would often be significantly dirty. About a week into rolling regularly along the slope, the weather had become unusually good for Newcastle upon Tyne. And despite trying to go on quiet times of day, I was sometimes needing to negotiate my way around people sitting, sunbathing, working, chatting, and or smoking. In fact, the amount of cigarette butts left along the slope was rather unpleasant. And on the 4th of July, I noticed that chewing gum stuck on the fake grass looked like it would be there for the foreseeable future. The following day, the graduation ceremonies began, and it wasn't practical to roll, even when the quad was quiet, due to the amount of litter, including some broken glass. The volume of footfall from graduates and guests during the week of the ceremonies left the artificial grass in a very unpleasant, dirty state for some time afterwards. Only when rains came did the cleanliness of the slope improve somewhat. One day I wrote in my journal, I had been trying to go slowly, as I could sense I was going to feel ill with too much rolling over and over, and that I looked a bit yellowish afterwards. I also became increasingly concerned about whether I was asking something inappropriate of other participants to roll along this dirty artificial grass made of unnatural substances. Was there a potential health issue which hadn't been sufficiently addressed by the risk assessment? On the occasions when somebody did join me, I emphasized that they could stop as soon as they wished to, and that they should move and rest as was right for them. I had begun green grass with a negative perception of fake grass and its possible ecological harmfulness, and this negativity increased through my embodied experience of working closely with it. One thing that became very apparent to me was my fluctuating work ethic. Sometimes I was happy to lie for ages looking up at the sky and indulging in the playfulness of rolling, while on other occasions, I seemed to feel an illogical need to achieve. For instance, to roll all the way down and or up again, when it was the activity, not the getting to the end, that was important. Albright reminds us that the structure of capitalism demands that we work hard so that we can play hard. As I rolled and rested in work time and at my place of work, I reflected on tensions and borders between doing and not doing, work and play. On one occasion early in the project, as I was practicing, I was approached by members of the university's security staff who told me they were responding to a report of a woman doing roly-polies outside the library. They were unable to say why this was a matter for security to investigate. We can only speculate whether the person reporting the incident had been concerned for my safety, other people's, or perhaps both. It seemed to suggest that activity, perhaps permissible as child's play, was not appropriate for a lone adult in an academic environment. Albright had spoken of confronting society's expectations and the need to practice failure. She says, I believe in the importance of spending time lying, rolling, and crawling across the ground, connecting to the support of gravity through our whole bodies. This kind of knowing refuses many of the social, economic, and sexual norms of the 21st century American culture. It also requires a great deal of practice and patience as we confront the rigid edifice of society's expectations about what constitutes success. In order to embrace alternative ways of being, to practice more failure, we need to explore the horizontal dynamics of communion and collaboration that challenge the traditional hierarchies of verticality, mastery, independence, and virtuosity. More could be said about the architecture of the slope and its significance within the politics of the practice. In Petra Cooper's recent book, Eco-Soma, she speaks of, quote, biopower's sorting function at the level of physical engagement with built environments. Some bodies are not welcome here. She goes on to say that maybe the failure to thrive in conditions of uniformity is also a somatic protest. I know that I would dig deeper into her text as I consider strategies for inclusion in my new project. A quote here from Andrea Olson, which brings me back to patterns of connection, particularly this yield and push that one of the speakers was speaking about this morning. So thinking about that yield and push, this presentation for me is a commitment to action. As we continue to emerge from the limitations COVID has imposed on us, I'm creating space and making plans for a new project, seeking to explore how movement practice can support people to live more fully and hopefully creatively and sustainably. I will begin by offering some taster opportunities this summer, probably in person and online, with a view to establishing a regular weekly practice from September onwards. Sessions will be advertised to the staff at my university and more widely. My intention is to focus on strategies to make the sessions as inclusive as possible, as my hope is that the group could encompass people whose health and well-being has been impacted by COVID. Time for stillness, rest, and not doing will be central to the approach. Recent conversations with a Northumbria colleague experiencing long COVID have impressed upon me the importance of gentleness, calmness, and pacing in approaches devised to support restoration. Drawing on practices of somatic inquiry and eco-phenomenology, participants will be encouraged to ponder and to use reflective writing and drawing to express and document their experiences. There will be opportunity for discussion and sharing of ideas. Practice will seek to foster sensory awareness and embodied connection to the ground, and will take place outdoors on grassland as and when appropriate to the group. Donna Haraway says that, quotes, neither despair nor hope is tuned to the senses, to mindful matter, to material semiotics, to mortal earthlings in thick co-presence. We will pay attention to how sensing may settle emotion and support connection and stability. Anna Singh's writing on precarity and the vitality of contamination, not self-containment, seem pertinent to keep returning to. quotes, staying alive for every species requires livable collaborations. I would need to take opportunity for supporting participants to monitor consciously what feels safe and comfortable for them as moving together and in collaboration with the living earth. In working through how this commingling and connection can be embedded within the movement practice, Elizabeth Jane Burnett's book, The Grassling, a geological memoir, offers a potential source of knowledge and inspiration. Through poetry and creative writing, Burnett weaves together scientific, historical, and personal embodied understandings of soil and land and belonging. Taking a strikingly immersive physical approach to moving in and with the land, Burnett explores her ancestral roots on her father's side here in Devon. Researched and written during the time of her late father's declining health, the work opens up questions of living and dying. The practice may bring forward feelings and thoughts related to loss. Albright reminds us that in root, the words gravity and grave are connected. She states that this is, quotes, one of the reasons that it can be scary to release into the support of that downward pull of the earth. It forces us to recognize the possibility of that final descent into our own death. Burnett's work can be helpful here. She writes, if the land, like the body, can hold trauma, it can also perhaps hold a healing. While plans for this project are still in the early stages, the reflections I have offered in this presentation provide me with some ground on which to build. I would like to conclude here with one final quotation from Burnett's The Grassling. After some time spent silently with the grass, I start making exploratory movements with my fingertips. I press into the earth, slowly increasing the pressure. Is anyone in? Deeper fingers, then palms, rocking, then kneading the ground. I take my socks off and the wet, soft grass, dandelion and clover is delicious. I go through the same motions with my feet, first the toes, then the balls of the feet, then the rocking back and forth. This is the start, the sounding out, the seeing if the other is open to conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have much time. We will take one question if anybody wants to ask a question. Yeah.
With the students, and it's fascinating to hear discussions on this kind of. Yeah, I just wondered, do your students kind of then shift their relationship to their kind of habitual and everyday spaces, and what are those kinds of, yeah, other perspectives maybe that will work for them in terms of their lived environment?
I'm sorry, with my hearing loss, I didn't quite catch every word about my students and how they're shifting.
Yeah, when your students have presented, then afterwards, what's their kind of shift of their perception of their teaching spaces? Or is there?
But there was, within Take Your Seats, we did have some students come and work with Paula's grand gestures. So that was lovely intergenerational experience for the students. And last semester, I did a sighted piece with the first years working in the cathedral. With the new project, I would really like to get some students involved again. But the work I've mostly spoken about has been with a whole host of other people and more with colleagues. For instance, when I was rolling in green grass, a colleague from the sociology department came and asked me if I was okay. When I got back to my office, I emailed her and said, oh, this is why I was laying on the ground there, and this is what I'm doing. And if you'd be up for coming in and rolling with me, you'd be very welcome. And it was humbling to realize that actually she was totally up for that and came and rolled with me, which wasn't perhaps what I was expecting.
Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to do something quite small and intimate. So if you want to come forward, you're very welcome to do it quite for you. There you are. That's kind of stage. Okay, thank you for coming. I know there's 58 things on at the same time, so I really appreciate being here. My presentation today is called Tempestries between Cloonshannagh, Bog Body and Textiles. Tempestries is a play on the words tempest, tapestry, and temperature. Tempestries seeks to use choreography, somatic, to locate textiles within landscapes as a way to explore, analyse, and make collaborative dance work in relation to the climate emergency. This dance research focuses on the bog body and her textiles found on Cloonshannagh bog as both science and creative narrative, in counterpoint and collaboration with the science of bog transformation and the historical and contemporary use of bogs in Ireland. Just going to give you that little present. Got a lot of things to hold on to here, so forgive me if I fumble a little. So I'm going to start with a little, just one slide of previous work. And this is work that Richard and I made a very long time ago in 2005. And we collaborated with about 2,000 people over a calendar year. And we knitted a piece of fabric that was about the size of a tennis court. And it developed two technologies that we developed through dance practice in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it connected, there were CCTV cameras around the city of Cork, and they connected busyness to complexity of stitch. And it connected the weather. We had a weather station, which Richard programmed to connect with the hue of colour. And it's this aspect, the sense of connecting with the environment, that led to this exhibition last year at the Birmingham Museum of Art in Pennsylvania. And I include it here partly as an interesting introduction, in the sense that textiles have long been of great interest to me, but also that having the work reframed within a climate context was a new thing. It wasn't something that we discussed or kind of thought about at the time, except I wanted to knit the weather and in kind of a large collaboration. And so this is also relevant to the project I'm talking about today, because it's with a project called the Tempestry Project. And I borrow with permission their name. And a tempestry is a much smaller textile where you knit one line of knitting or crochet per day over a calendar year for a particular place. And the colour is standardised, so you can do comparative things. So in this exhibition, there were Tempestries, the coldest and hottest places in the United States, which are in Alaska and
a desert, I can't remember the name of right now, and they were done from kind of 1916 and 2016, so you had this 100-year difference. And it was a real honour to have the exhibition framed in this way with this really interesting group of people doing the Tempestries project.
Meadow, roots, black, ladies, bedstraw, roots, red, fog, asphodel, yellow.
And for those of you who were not here, I'm just going to say that again. I can't dance and do it at the same time, but that was meadowsweet, roots, black, ladies' bedstraw, roots, red, fog, asphodel, roots, yellow. This is notes from a Zoom chat with Dolores Carney, who is a PhD student in Ireland, and she's an Irish Research Council scholarship recipient, and she is an experimental textile archaeologist. From Friday, the 10th of June, 2022 at 3 p.m. She was about 5 foot, tiny little pelvis, a lot of the cloth attached. Spoke to the person there at the excavation. It was horrendous weather, lashing rain. They decided to take it in blocks. It's in Collins Barrett. One of the conservators said the remains were very dry. Her mantle, the largest amount of fragments, were unspun tassel coming out of the fabric. This is from the database of the Irish Excavation Reports 1321. A bog body came to light in Cloonshannagh, County Roscommon, in late May 2005 during small-scale mechanical peat cutting operations in a private bog just off the N4 between Termonbarry and Strokestown. The body was that of a female and was a bog skeleton with no soft tissue remaining. This is from the proceedings of the North European Symposium for Archaeological Textiles. I might just say that again. This is from the proceedings of the North European Symposium for Archaeological Textiles. I might just say that again. From the proceedings of the North European Symposium for Archaeological Textiles, The Lady of Cloonshannagh Bog by Elizabeth Wincott Heckett. The Lady of Cloonshannagh Bog by Elizabeth Wincott Heckett. 2013. 7 different types of wool cloth were reclaimed from the bog. 6 woven well and of good quality, using yarn that was efficiently spun. We do not know how the Cloonshannagh woman died, since the peat cutting machine working in the bog scattered her clothing, scattered her bones, and shredded her clothes. I won't say that again. Shadows. 9:45 Grand View, Boulder, Colorado, 2nd of October, 2021. I'm laying on my back on the bed in the dark side bedroom, no windows, closed door, with the lights off. We've been gathering grasses and other plants to see how we might evoke bogginess through shadow. Beth is here beside me with her phone torch shining through a handful of dried seed heads, slowly grazing close and then changing angles to see what might work. I read out some of my text as she does, and in this way, we wander into story making. When we're away the following weekend, I sit in the living room seeing if I can make a shadow puppet for the skeleton, cutting out tibia and fibula and skull, arranging them in a shallow dip. I work again with Beth, who has a PhD and a book on Wayang Kulit, Malaysian shadow puppet theatre. And this time we work in the studio to move vegetation and the torch to wake this story up through the play of light and angle. I love how it's very gently rocking up and down. Did you see that? But this is the mosses' story. In their slow and patient way, the mosses wait their time. Sphagnum moss begins to grow on the surface of the dead vegetation. The moss flourishes even as it dies and grows again. Another millennia or so and peat begins to form. And this is the making of the bog. Slow, dark as hunger, thick with memory. So I worked on this story in Boulder, Colorado, one of the driest places I could think about working on bogs. And I worked with two beautiful dancers, Ondine Geary and Chrissy Nelson. And we spent quite a lot of time understanding the science of bog formation, that they were glacial dips that filled with reeds And slowly that dead vegetation then became inhabited by the sphagnum moss that then over millennia, about 1 millimetre a year, develops these wetland forms, which you may very well be familiar with. In Ireland, there are two forms. There are dome bogs and there are kind of more flat bogs. And so I wanted to just share a little bit about that process of working with the sensibility of bogginess with dancers very far away from bogs. So I couldn't go to any bogs. We worked a lot with the back body and a lot with opening the shoulder blades, this kind of sense of falling back. We also worked a lot with voice, and particularly extended voice and a lot of fricatives. And I'll show you some of that, a video of some of that at the end. So I got very interested in mosses, and I started writing about mosses, and I brought with me this interest in textiles. And I was in Colorado on a Fulbright, which gave me access to spaces and kind of research centers, which I might not otherwise have had. So I was very grateful for that. And one of the centers that I worked with was a place called the Unstable Design Lab, which is an experimental textile lab. And through going every week, I don't know what they made of me actually, because I don't think they'd had many dancers or dance artists kind of come in. But I just kept going. And I bought cake. And slowly I got to know these people, and I ended up in the sharing of the work in progress, which I'll show you a little bit at the end of the presentation. I collaborated with three of them, three textile artists, and one in particular, Sasha de Koninck, is a really interesting textile artist. And I was really curious about the fact that the Lady of Cloonshannagh bog, this bog body, was found with these 7 kinds of textiles. And one of them was what is called a shaggy mantle, which was a kind of shaggy cloak, or we think it was a cloak because it was ripped to pieces by the peat cutting machine. But it was a woven cloth, and it had these tassels kind of through it. And it was part of the kind of Irish costume and kind of outfits, and was exported in their hundreds and thousands actually during the kind of 17th, 18th century from Ireland. And they were prized because they were well made, but also because they were waterproof. So there's some process of waterproofing them. So it just became, if this is indeed a shaggy mantle that she had on when she got lost in the bog, it would be the earliest example in Ireland. And I became really interested in the fact that this fragments of textile have survived for more than 1,000 years through this connection with being in the bog, and they're preserved because the bog is very acidic and anaerobic. And so I started to be really interested in the connection between this textile and moss, and finding ways to make that connection. So Sasha made us a kind of prototype, if you like. This is all just kind of work in progress that I'm sharing today. So I'm going to show you some pictures of that. I'm not sure this is the most exciting one to get, but So this is Anna Pillow, and I was really privileged to work with really fabulous dancer. Anna is not only a kind of endurance marathon runner, she runs kind of, I don't even know what they're called, but they're kind of more than marathons, they're longer than marathons. And she also is a beautiful aerialist and used to work for Cirque du Soleil. So and was really interested in this whole research. And we worked with someone else called Brad Gallagher, and it was, again, we did it in it was only very preliminary. I'll show you a very short video in a moment. We used something called chroma key technique, where you can pick out a color on a projection and then replace it with something else. So all we did was, for this, is have a video taken of Anna as she performs, and she's working with the textile, and she's working with images of falling and then being the moss, and kind of working between that, and a projection in which the green parts of her costume are replaced with video of actual moss that I'd taken in Ireland. So it was very preliminary. I'd want to work with it in more detail and to kind of explore more nuanced ways of working with it. But it was really interesting for me to be able to explore some of these ideas. Is there any possibility of getting sound with the video? I'll play it again, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry? It is extremely quiet, yes. No, it's fine. It was only a little clip. I've got one more video at the end, but it's only a short couple of minutes. Okay. My last one. It's my last one. If you would like to, and would you like to come down and lay on the floor and close your eyes for this one? Or you can lay on where you're laying anyway. That looks quite comfy. No obligation. You can sit down if you want. And just take a breath. Let your body fall into the floor. And listen. A bog is not a place for running, but she's running nonetheless. It's a place of damp, hung chill and mist, clinging to throat and chest. It's a place of uncertain steadiness, there where the wateriness of the world mingles with its provisional solidity. She can't see if she's being followed. Humps and ridges separate dark pools, and she's careful to keep to the higher ground, but her feet are drenched anyway. The mist shifts and confuses her. Her breath coming faster now, leaving her in ragged clouds. She turns to check behind her again, but there is nothing but the grey, curving mist. And then she falls.
Before all of this, she was a girl, and then a young woman, and who sometimes spoke with her mouth full, loved the red-orange glow of autumn, liked to dance when she got the chance with the other women, who laughed easily when around the other women. It's the middle of the 7th century in Cloonshannagh, County Roscommon. But here she is now, falling into one of the brown, black pools. She stumbles and tries to raise herself, but the wet clings to her clothes and it's cold. She manages to get up and runs on heavily, her hands covered in black peat. Fear is a canopy just beyond her great cloak, covered in tufts of wool carefully placed into the weave. Normally, she feels lucky to have it. There isn't much that keeps out the Irish weather, but now it is drenched in bog water and heavy as hell. And then she falls again. And this time, the boggy pool is larger, and she won't be able to rise from its embrace for 1,000 years and more. I'm going to show you a couple more images. So if you would like to gently find a way to sitting, you're welcome to stay on the floor, or you can go back to your seats. This is Ondine from the Sharing of Work in Progress I did at the B2 Centre for Media Art and Performance in the Atlas Institute. So we worked with these ideas of running, the idea that the woman on the bog was lost or running. How do I click on that? Just go like that? No, obviously not. Find it first. Oh, here we are. There is sound with this. There is sound with this. Oh, no. It's laying on the screen here. Yeah. I need to, what do I need to do to make that be on the screen? Oh, yeah, take that. And show.
Oh, it's because you're in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, we're ending that show and then we'll just go to the YouTube clip.
Yeah, and then minimize the PowerPoint and then go back to it in a minute.
That's fine, I'm done, I think.
Perfect.
Yeah, thanks. Can I get sound for that?
Yeah, no, you've got sound.
The next shifts into the feeding cell, her breath coming faster now, leaving her in ragged clouds. She turns to check again behind her, but there is nothing but the grey curving mist, and then she falls. Two by two, a wooden 2x2 quilt block are of a wooden 2x2 quilt block. The daughter of Hannah in front of her. She's also enchanted. In her careful hands, she touches something that laughed out human touch, sweating with a dream her. She is entangled with textiles like this. By the time they're weaving, the room is alight with colours in the ditches of the Irish countryside. Here they are, beautiful, difficult, funny, and wise.
Okay, that's me done.
Okay, amazing. Well, this is going to be very surreal because it'll feel like I am talking to an echo chamber. So I just want to acknowledge that we're all here as a holobiont self, bringing everything we've breathed in during the day. And even though I'm just talking to the echo chamber of myself on the screen, we are all the funk and pheromones and microbiome that we are bringing to this interactive experience. Okay, so I'd like to start with a quote from the AIDS activist and author of North Enough, AIDS and Other Clear Cuts, Jan Zita Grover. It is as if the land secretes pheromones testifying to its abuse, detectable only by those who are themselves damaged. So, my name is Sophie Strand. I'm a writer at the intersection of spirituality, ecology, and myth. I live in the Hudson Valley of New York State, the land of the Munsee Lenape people. It is a land that knows genocide. It knows how to eat blood, how to eat entire genocidally destroyed ecosystems of beings and narrative and belief. Land that once was home to the carrier pigeons and chestnut trees. Land intimate with the weight of glaciers, with what it is like to be triturated down to dust, to be destroyed and cut and wounded with such crystalline accuracy that you are left behind with a different geography. Glacial riven land, ocean molded valleys. This land knows what it is like to be changed in ways that far exceed simplistic human binaries of good and bad. And for someone disabled, for someone with a nervous system altered by abuse, I have looked to this landscape for lessons on how to become differently, how to see that your very makeup has been changed and then agree to keep growing in tandem, in uncomfortable conjugation with other beings that flow beyond the easy critters we call kin, to grow with pain, with microbes, with indigestibility, to keep letting tides of other species grow into the spaces where my joint sublocks, to let yeasts and seeds and spores break apart my secret crevices and explode my fictional selfhood. So I'm a writer, I'm disabled, I'm a survivor, I'm a compost heap of every writer and author and thinker I've interacted with. And I am an animist who believes in an animism of chaotic difference, who believes everything is alive quite differently. And very often these days, I have been asked for exercises that will encourage greater ecological embodiment and connection. But I think we need to question nature as it has been weaponized against the disabled the oppressed, the neurodivergent, the incurable, the survivors, the people who will never make it to the forest to bathe or the hillside to sit. We need to question paradigms that suggest that disabled and sick bodies are unnatural versions of natural health. There is an unspoken belief nested inside of much of the dominant liberal rhetoric about health and environmentalism that nature is pristine, other, health is wholeness. Anything that deviates is unfit for survival. It is against nature, a genetic glitch, a maladaptation. Maybe we don't need a pristine field or hill. Maybe the microbes and twitches and moans of our own complex landscapes have as much to teach us as a spread of wildflowers or an aerial view of rainforests a continent away. I want to share the titular essay of the book I've just completed about healing beyond hope and healing beyond the human. In it, I use science and ecological storytelling to queer the disabled body, the traumatized body, as it is posited against nature, against wholeness, against health, against dominant narratives. The book and the essay is called The Body is a Doorway. The body is a doorway. And for survivors of early trauma and abuse, that doorway is always open, wide open. Hypersensitivity, both cognitive and physical, has been tied to early trauma and sexual abuse time and time again. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Rheumatology showed that in a sample of 67,000 women, those with the highest incidence of childhood abuse were at a 3-fold greater risk of developing lupus than those who had not experienced abuse. Survivors are also at an increased risk for developing serious autoimmunity, chemical sensitivity, and allergy disorders. The correlations between early abuse and illness, disability, and neurodivergence are too many to list. The takeaway would seem to be that childhood experiences of trauma register not only emotionally, but physically. And this was something I understood very intimately as a child. I seemed to notice more bugs, more smells, more texture, more noise, more micro expressions on adults' faces, more birdsong, more temperature fluctuations. I knew something terrible had happened to me and that I was quite good at keeping it hidden. But I did not connect my radical hypersensitivity to the abuse. I just knew that for better or for worse, I seemed to be highly attuned to my surroundings. Yes, I watched doors, constantly monitored adults around me, and scanned rooms for signs of danger. But I also was transfixed for hours by dirt spangled with mycelia, air scintillating with dust, slugs leaving behind starlight slick stories on the porch. I could read the breathing patterns of our cats and dogs keyed into the smallest fluctuations in their well-being. Blue is more blue. I could feel a cat's purr in my belly. Frog song vibrated below my tongue. The blooming lilac was so bright a smell, it almost made a sound, a song. Life was often agonizing. But much to my confusion, it also seemed more available to me than it did to others. Why was this? Sensory gating is the neurological process whereby we filter out redundant stimuli from our central experience to create a homogenized reality. The experience, while necessary to function, has been tightened by patriarchy and civilization. Research at MIT, especially the work of Michael Halassa, has shown that we receive an outrageous amount of sensory data. Yet we manage to hear our name in a crowded room and spot a friend's face in a sea of people. These stimuli don't show up more brightly. They show up because we learn to dampen and gate out the sensory information we deem to be redundant. As a child, we learn from our parents and our social environments what information is redundant. And as that sensory information gets classified as non-goal oriented, we stop noticing it. Children see the world as magical, not because they are naive, but because they are actually more neurologically open to it. They haven't yet been taught to gate out the aliveness of the world. You know, the issue is that for most of history, the way we learned how to gate was based on an ecological context. We would learn to read tree patterns, to spot certain plants in the leaves, and to distinguish between certain kinds of animals and landscapes. But now the way that we gate out stimuli is based on our plastic culture. And so we gate out the animacy of the world. One strange aspect of the abuse is that it opens these gates up wider, and it shows you that you are permeable. It also creates a need to keep those gates open, to remain hypervigilant. To shut down sensory stimuli would be to put yourself at risk. This is why so many survivors of childhood abuse experience both a constant alertness to their surroundings. And for so long, I characterized that hypersensitivity, that inability to gate out everything, as a burden and as a failure. And it is true that this constant state of awareness leaves your body exhausted and much more likely to develop illness. But if I am tired of how my mind and body are affected by this, I am even more tired of the paradigm that problematizes how I diverge from a normative body and normative nervous system. Yes, the abuse made me hypersensitive and probably led to my genetic illness manifesting so dramatically later on. But my hypersensitivity and awareness didn't discriminate between human and non-human stimuli. And this has been my saving grace. While I scanned a room for danger, I also let my eyes take in the gestalt of ecosystems. I noticed minute shifts in cloud formations. I could read the silver flipping twist of leaves to predict the exact moment when a storm would hit. I could taste the milky rust flavor of mycorrhizal systems below my feet as I walked through a forest. I was able to notice more, particularly the very small and very unacknowledged molds, mushrooms, tadpoles, pond scum, voids of birdsong where the year before there had been a frenetic chorus. For a long time, aware that my illness was tied to trauma, I made myself available to every possible healing modality to try and integrate these violent memories. I just needed a little bit more EMDR, a little bit more somatic experiencing, a little more acupuncture and talk therapy to bring my nervous system back into the window of tolerance. It was my responsibility to heal this trauma so that my body could finally relax. It is important to note that westernized somatics and psychotherapy have created a baseline of comfort and relaxation as the goal treatment is supposed to provide. The individual and the individual's commitment to healing are centered. But when trauma is a multi-causal event caused by a web of relations, caused by systems of oppression, how can the individual possibly untie all the tangles? And should that even be the working goal? Perhaps relaxation and comfort should not be the goal as we confront climate collapse. I'm not sure I believe in wellness anymore or healing. I'm increasingly wary of how both terms have been weaponized by institutions of oppression that enacted the harm in the first place, seeding us with the belief that we are ultimately individually responsible for how harm appears in our bodies. This phenomenon is known as healthism and is defined as the preoccupation with personal health and personal responsibility for health as primary, often at the detriment of understanding the health of one person is intimately tied to and representative of a whole population. Trauma does not belong to an individual. It is a web that includes someone. It is not an object that can be removed. Your body's innate ability to dance with harm and with discomfort is not always a problem. It is a relational tactic, an unconsensual opening to both the good and the bad, the human and the more than human. As I release the need to perform completion or healing, I'm more drawn to the idea of alchemical storytelling. If you have a genetic illness with no cure, a divergent nervous system, a wounded heart, if you can't undo what happened, how can you recontextualize trauma? How can you tell a new story about it? What if the abused body didn't passive-aggressively keep the score? What if it acted more like an aperture, capturing pictures of horror, as well as also imprinting cosmic light from distant galaxies? What if the body was a doorway open to more than human stories, just as I realized that my genetic connective tissue disease mapped directly onto my love of underground fungal connective systems, so could I understand my trauma to be less of a mortal wound and more as a compass pointing out of anthropocentrism. What if the shape of your wounding, the exact flickering silhouette of your hypersensitivity, was the shape of the doorway into another being's pain and experience? I am allergic to spiritual practitioners who suggest my trauma was an initiation, but I am also equally unimpressed by the prognosis of Western psychology and colonial somatics that I must dole out hundreds of dollars and years of time to manage and integrate and fix these problems. I have earnestly tried to integrate the trauma. I have spent thousands of dollars trying to come back into a normative nervous system, and I'm done. If I can't fix this, then let me understand how it could be my superpower. If I can't close my sensory gating, then open me wider. Dilate me like a cervix so that I may be the birth canal for stories that are not about human beings and human progress. Let me become a doorway for viruses and ecosystems and fungi and dove song. Let me become a doorway so big and so open that a new way of being can emerge, one not tied to the fiction of human exceptionalism, one that is equally aware of the agony and ecstasy and is allowed to wildly swing out of the window of tolerance, achieving both the valleys and peaks that our culture has denied us. Let me exceed the graph. Let me swing past wellness into something wilder and less predictable. We could say the climate itself is out of its window of tolerance. How then can I ride these nervous system oscillations in wild solidarity? How does the body of an abuse survivor act as an expert barometer for shifting ecosystems and temperatures and weather patterns? It is important to note that the temperate conditions human beings consider optimal are an actual rarity in the history of deep time. What if the window of normalcy that trauma survivors are expected to re-enter isn't normalcy at all? What if it's just an anthropocentric model that gates out the wily and often ecstatic experience of being ecologically alive and aware? I am tired of the word survivor and personal responsibility of coming back into cultural legibility. I want a better word and a better story. What if those who survived trauma and early abuse could call themselves doorways, too big and too wide for binaries of good and bad? What if we could honor that our nervous systems and our bodies are openings to stories that are vital right now as we confront cultural chaos, mass extinction, and climate collapse? So I ask you, what does it mean to be ecologically embodied in a world where most landscapes are threaded through with extinction and anthropogenic violence? Coming back into communion with those landscapes is not always going to be an eco-sensual, enchanted experience. It will be extraordinarily uncomfortable. It is going to be like a foot that's been asleep, prickling back to life. It is going to be very uneasy coming back into contact with all this pain, the bumptious struggling, the sorrowing animacy that we have been gating out. But I believe that it is to the people who are intimate with discomfort, with cultural illegibility, with otherness, with bodily interruptions and glitches, that we can learn how to navigate these portals of discomfort that we must necessarily pass through in order to access new worldings. So I think we're at about the point when this was supposed to end, and maybe I can open it up to questions. I don't know exactly how that works. Hi, Richard. Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted, but hi, Sophie. I was actually down in the main space when you were coming on the stage, and then I run upstairs so that I could be there when you came off the stage. Thank you so much for your contribution. As always, a very strong kind of call to arms in many ways, and one of the most powerful things I've heard you say is, "I'm done with this." You know, I'm just done with this. And so the kind of metaphor of the doorway becomes a very powerful thing, because it's about an opening up. It's about a turning around of the kind of negativity of the kind of wellness fascism that is,
Yeah.
you know, thrust, I think, I have to say, particularly on North Americans, and yet, you know, absolutely elsewhere too. But I think when wellness is a market and when healthcare is a market, those two things sit very evilly together, I think.
They do indeed.
Thank you very much. We don't have any immediate questions, I think partly because there's a lot of digestion.
Yeah.
And we've had a very long day of extraordinary inputs as well. But I do know that you know, people have absolutely heard what you've said, and I know it was a very weird experience being out there kind of on your own, talking to your echo chamber. But there was audiences on both sides of the virtual divide, and the session will also be available afterwards too. So I just want to thank you immensely for coming and joining and being with us today. I hope that we continue to communicate, and I know the audience is there giving you claps that you can't hear. So.
Well, spores of gratitude back from the Hudson Valley, all across the oceans, to everyone at Dartington. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And actually, our keynote earlier this afternoon was coming from the Hudson Valley as well. So,
oh, really? Interesting.
Maybe next door. Who knows? All right, Sophie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, as well in the audience, for joining us.